Good morning, gardening friends. Today is Sunday, June 25th, and it's about 7 o'clock in the morning. Beautiful day. The birds are out, and I'm just sitting here having my first cup of coffee for the day. We've had a lot of rain this last week, which means we've had a lot of growth in the gardens, both front and back. Back here, most notably, you can see the bananas are really coming along nicely. I did remove 2 of them because they were just getting too thick, but they're unfurling nicely. They're already over my head. This tall one is, the main chunk right here is probably about 7 feet tall. Bananas always look very tropical. Make things look tropical. Here you can see my golden chalice vine has leafed out nicely. So far, nothing's eaten those leaves. They only get the one flush of leaves, and it'll bloom in the fall. Here you can see the smaller one is a little behind. Angel's trumpet has gotten nice and green since I fertilized it. The only thing not doing real well here are the primroses, but I've never tried summering over primroses. And they may or may not make it, but usually I would throw them out. They've definitely been bug eaten, and I'm about ready to transplant my little daturas out since they have caught. My nepenthes, I think this was a Nepenthes alba, is doing really well. Alba implies white, but it looks like the old pictures are red, and the newer ones are this yellowish red color. And I must say, they're getting a lot more efficient at catching bugs, because you really can't pick it up. But oh, that one, maybe you can see it. It is just loaded with bug life at the bottom of that. Part of it has to do with being over the top of those watering cans. I keep them there because they fill with rainwater, since I don't have gutters. And I use, of course, that to water my garden. Rainwater is nice because it's kind of like a little free fertilizer. There's a little bit of nitrogen content just from falling through the air. It's also good for your hair if you wash your hair in rainwater. I wouldn't wash my hair in these cans of rainwater because they're kind of grungy looking, but they're good for plants. Here you can see my wandering dude, Tradescantia. It's starting to bloom already. These were the cuttings I took probably about a month ago. So obviously the cuttings have taken. It looks like maybe one might have died out there, but it'll be taken over pretty soon. A new one came up at its base. And my colocasia is wanting to send out its tentacles to take over the world. And I have decided to let them sort of just ramble. I do try to keep a space so that I can walk without stepping on those things. But there you can see how it spreads. There's a little colocasia coming, and it's forming a bulb. So if you ever plant one in your backyard in zones 8B or above, that's how it spreads to every nook and cranny. My other pitcher plant, the Sarracenia, is doing well. It seems like it's getting taller this year. I don't know as if this is that efficient at catching bugs. It's still living, so it must catch something. But I have seen little flies sort of go in and come out of that. Maybe it catches gnats. Here you can see my peach-colored or yellow angel's trumpet from last year. It shot straight up. Of course, it helped that I fertilized it, and the top leaves, knock on wood, you can see it's not being eaten anymore. It's risen above the Aspidistra. You can see the little flowers on my equisetum. Equisetum looks very sort of modernist if you put it in a pot. You really do need to put it in a pot. It spreads rapidly. And my, let's move this chair out of the way, frangipani is just about ready to start blooming. This one has never bloomed for me, but this one is only 3 years old. I bought it from Lowe's with flower. And you can see down here the Johnny Jump-Ups that seeded themselves. I kid you not, I did not plant them. There couldn't be more evenly spaced. They seeded themselves from the Johnny Jump-Ups that were in this strawberry pot over the winter. And it looks like there's a little fern coming up at the base. So I'm going to let the fern grow and fill the pot, and you won't need the Johnny Jump-Ups in future. Strawberry pot is doing well. I've decided I'm going to clean up these papyrus. You can see here last year's growth is in the middle, and this year's are on the sides, and I think what I'm going to do is cut it up and move that to the center, and I'll get a new little plant out of it. My gaillardia is blooming down there. Roses are starting to peter out in the heat of the summer, but I've still got a couple. This little topiary has done really well. I popped it out of the pot and replanted it earlier this year, and it has put on a spurt of growth. It had no growth last year. Didn't die, but it didn't grow. And my mint, even though I put it in a pot, you see how it spreads. It's spreading into other pots. So this is, I think it's called afternoon mint or after 4 mint, one or the other. So I'm going to let it root in these other pots and move it about into other pots, maybe as an understory plant. My lilies of the Nile have recovered from the beating they took last week in the hailstorm. Here everything is just thickening up and growing very lushly. My ligularia needs a little prune up this week. It's looking a little the worse for wear, but it'll bloom. And this little one has done better this year. You can see it sent out larger leaves. It might bloom this year. I did a little cleaning in this area this week. Oh, I see some kind of an animal was in my water this morning because he's disturbed the little shells around there. I still have the turtle living back here, or tortoise. Here you can see the difference in coloration of the Nico blue hydrangeas. Why they get spots, I imagine it's some sort of fungus, but it is what it is. The Spanish moss is looking healthy. If it grows there, I will move bits and pieces of it to different places in the yard. There's some more of the Nico blue. You can see the different stages. It turns like a pinkish yellow in time. You can actually cut that off and dry it. I just prefer, since I don't have that many blooms, I prefer to leave it on the plant. Although I'm not complaining, because last year I had only 2 blooms in the whole backyard, so I've got many more than last year. There you can see the bromeliad. I haven't removed it from that pot. I planted it there about 3 years ago. I do bring the pot in for real cold snaps, when it's going to be cold for a couple of days in a row. And just bring it inside in the garage, and it does pretty well. Here is the white angel's trumpet that was a cutting from the one that used to be here. And I don't think you'll be able to see it, but I did notice underneath there you'll see the big stump behind this young green shoot in the front. The big stump is the old white angel's trumpet, and it is sending up some little shoots. So apparently it did survive the winter. It's just a little slow in sending up shoots. Now this colocasia, I don't want the little rootlets or whatever you call those things coming out of the pot. So whenever I see one, I will nip it, because I just want to have it in the pot. It's a nice potted plant for far corners of your yard because it doesn't seem to require as much moisture as the coleus, that's not coleus, what is that stuff? I'll think of it later. It's not even cyclamen. Well, it's early in the morning and I haven't had all of my coffee yet. You know what it is. I'm probably going to be losing these two ferns. We'll see how things go in the next week. Because I've got two more hooks I'm going to be putting on those two posts. And I'm going to try and get 4 of the same plant to plant along the wall now that it's in more sun. I did open up my saw palmetto. It was just taking over too much of the yard, so what I did is I cut back all of the branches that were splaying outward into the yard to encourage it to grow up. And if you don't know why it's called a saw palmetto, it's not going to show up here. But along the edge of these branches has little bitty bumps, which I can run my thumb across like this with no problem. However, if I brush it against my arm, it will cut the skin. So that's why it's called saw palmetto. I guess down here you can see the little rough edges. It's not as bad as some palms, but it's just something to be aware of. How I learned is I was carrying an armful of that to the street, and it shifted and moved ever so slightly. I'll live. This garden has really thickened out nicely. A couple of weeks ago I did prune out all the dead in my satsuma. This side the cold really got to, and so you can see some of the stubs up there. It's not going to have any fruit this year. Last year it had a lot of fruit, and typically that's what satsumas do. They'll have a real lush year, bountiful fruit, and then they'll take a break. I kind of like the look of looking through here into the other part of the yard. This is doing really well. I pruned it back, and you can see it's got some new branches. That's my Owari plum that I planted to take the place of the Meyer lemon. Since we are into global warming, whether you believe it or not, I have noticed that some of my tropical things do die in the winters, and I'm getting too old to be covering things at night, so I'll go with it and plant the Owari plum instead. The kumquats and the satsumas are still doing fine. Oh, come to think of it, you can see this is kind of odd. I don't know if you can make it out. I can't get any closer. But there is a satsuma fruit, and right next to it are some flowers. Not satsuma, that's a oh, what are they called? The little orange balls that I use. Again, I'll think of it a little later. But it's in both fruit and blossom stage at the same time. Here's where I spent the most of last week, was cleaning up this fence. It looks a lot better with the plants removed from the top of it. And I did decide to cut back my yellow vines here to just keep them to the top of the little arched trellises. And I also limbed up my jelly palm at this side of the yard. It's a lot easier to get through now with the lawnmower. And we cut back, this is the start, the first trim of the hollies. We got the bulk of the holly out of the way. It used to stretch to almost the top of the fence. And this last Thursday we hacked the top off. I'm going to thin it up a little bit more. This, when I first bought the property, there were 7 of those hollies along that fence line. And I cut them back once to have the fence put up to the ground. And they sprouted up, and these are the result. But then probably about 5 to 10 years ago, I decided I wanted, since this was a sunny spot, this faces south and is protected by the fence, I thought that was a waste of sun to keep the hedge of hollies there. And so I started, and plus it was a pain in the butt to prune the hollies or trim them, because you'd have to squeeze between them, and they're Beaufort hollies, which means they only have 3 thorns at the tips of the leaves, but I'd get all scraped up squeezing between them. So I took most of them out, but left those 2. And they grew too big. So I may limb them up. This one is sort of naturally limbed up, and I may wind up limbing them both up. Tune in next week and see what it looks like. But it always looks good when you have an established garden, when you give plants a haircut, a trim. It's kind of like getting a haircut at your hairdresser's. Makes you look thinner and 20 years younger, just to get your hair cut. It's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I did take the male cone out of the center of this cycad because I noticed the new growth was starting to come. Interestingly enough, when I'd cut this one out because I saw the new growth and was careful not to touch the new growth, it does have kind of a pine smell when you cut it. And back in here, I trimmed back my nandinas, and I got rid of a nandina that was behind there. And there you can see my snowball viburnum. It is now a, what would you call it, a plant to reckon with in the corner. It's over 6 foot tall. It did not bloom this year. That's its 3rd year. Hopefully it'll be full of blooms next year. So this little corner has come together nicely now that it's in full sun. The bottle brush is loving it. You can see some of the new growth at the top. So this little corner has changed in character immensely because now it's very sunny. And when you sit here, you kind of get a nice view of the yard. The plan when I designed this backyard was to have these 2 benches to have a destination to come to at the far end of the yard, but by putting them at the catty-cornered at an angle, it makes the yard look bigger. And the other advantage is the saw palmetto blocks the view of this little sitting area from the house. So from the house, you don't really see all the stuff out here, and you don't see the statue of Venus either from inside the house. And here where the loquat was, you can see the ponytail palm has greened up nicely, did not burn. The nut tree is this, and it's actually growing pretty nicely. So by the end of this year, it'll probably be another 3 foot tall. And the blueberries are thickening out. And that is another one of the peach or yellow colored angel's trumpet. That's the new one I bought this year. Really, the only way you can tell that there was ever a tree here is by the Aspidistra. you can see what happens to Aspidistra when it gets shocked. And it basically, the sun burned all of the leaves because they were used to being under the tree. And eventually I'll take the burned leaves out. It'll recover and the new leaves will be more sun resistant and they'll stay green. It can live in full sun. It just doesn't do as lushly. Kind of nice here now that this is opened up. You can kind of see through the palmetto. So the backyard is really coming together nicely. It's kind of nice to hear the fountains going. And here's another one of those caladiums. That's what that is. I didn't plant that. That was planted probably about 4 years. I didn't plant it this year. That was planted about 4 years ago. And while we're at it, going down memory lane, this is a kumquat tree. Let's see what else. I'm not going to go in the front yard. I may do a little quick video on that another time. Here you can see the crocosmia is in full bloom. I had to stake up the crocosmia. I got these trellises from Lowe's a couple of years ago. They have 3 stakes and there are 2 circles. I have the same thing around my toad lilies back in there. And these hydrangeas look nice, except for the fact that it's annoying when the blossoms come in amongst the leaves. What I may do is, since you can't see them, I may cut them and bring them in the house. But there's still more flowers coming, so it's a good year for hydrangeas for a change. This garden bed isn't quite as lush as I'd like it to be, but it's getting there. The good thing is the daylilies are starting to really take over this year. I don't know why this year. I've had them there for, I want to say 4 or 5 years, but whatever, they're growing, and I would like them to take over that entire bed. I had crocosmia here, these orange things, but the problem with the crocosmia is it gets too tall, and it actually swallowed up the sundial. That sundial actually does work. It's positioned, that arrow points north in order to read the numbers. The numbers are read off of this inside ring. Of course, it's not working right now because the sun's not on it. But this garden will eventually be nothing but the wild daylilies, which will be nice. It'll remind me of my northern roots. Here, this bay tree, bay laurel, is thickening out nicely. And of course, my trough sedum's doing well. Really, everything is doing really well here. I can't complain. This is what I didn't get here yet. This is what a non-staked clump of crocosmia looks like. It looks like something came in there and took a nap on them. That's the problem with at least the wild crocosmias. They get so thick and eventually they just flop over. So I will stake that up. There is actually a pathway that goes through there. And behind that little wall is an area I've never taken you to. It's basically just clean with gravel, stones at the base. It was going to be a storage area. It was going to be a potting area. And now I'm toying with the idea of it being a little greenhouse or cold frame area. Not really been developed other than being cleared. Haven't quite decided, and it's been, what, 30 years so far? I can tell you what doesn't work. I had made it a little potting area and built in a nice little potting bench and kept all my pots there, and they were protected from the weather under the bench. But in reality, it was so far from where I wanted the plants that I wound up using my deck instead. So, nice plans, but it really didn't work out. So, That did not last more than a couple of years. Well, actually, it stayed for about 10 years, but I hardly ever used it and finally decided to get rid of it. I'm going to be adding something else here maybe this week. I like these sweet potato vines, but they're just not really doing it for me. They're not thick enough to cover the basket in. And this little plant is doing really well. And I still have my Lenten roses. I need to stake them up. They've kind of flopped over, but you can see the flower parts are still there, although they're technically the leaf bracts. And this one is still over here. So this is, they kind of blend in with the leaves, but there's some kind of excitement to look at in amongst the wandering dude. And that's about it for today. I do have a little dish out here. I keep it out for the turtle. He knows that's his little spot going through the grass over there, the monkey grass. And so I always keep that full of water, and I can tell when he's been there because I fill it up fresh every day. And when he goes in it, somehow he spits up mud inside of it. So there's a lot of mud in the dish. So that's about it for today. I hope you all get out and enjoy the beautifully sunny day. And I'll see you another day. Take care.